A lot of people have asked me over the past year what I think about Michael MH, formerly known as Michael WMH, and his Monster Hunter guides. For the 20 or so people who regularly watch my Sunbreak streams, they will be aware that I don't think highly of his advice. However, upon actually doing a thorough review of his videos, many of the basic gameplay tips he gives in his early videos are pretty good. There are concepts that he introduces that would be useful for inexperienced players. Unfortunately, I think there's a lot of stuff he overlooks or gets wrong when he attempts to tackle more advanced concepts. In this video, I'm going to summarize the key points he makes across some of his videos and give my thoughts in reaction to them. Let me say first though that even though I'm going to be mostly negative and critical as usual, the sort of content Michael is making is very important. So many guides on YouTube just show you the basic weapon moveset and a very loose game plan. Michael is trying to demonstrate some concepts specific to Monster Hunter, which is a great idea. First video is how to tell if you're actually good at Monster Hunter. He uses a bunch of terminology that he says is from fighting games, but none of that actually really matters. He just wants to make the simple point that the more often you hit the monster and the less you get hit, the better you are at Monster Hunter. It's pretty obvious, but he's not wrong here. He makes a weird statement at the end though where he says, only criticize your gameplay when the monster is enraged. I think he says this because monsters are generally easier to fight when unenraged, and he wants people to gauge the skill against the harder mode, but this doesn't matter at all. You can still make mistakes against unenraged monsters, and unenraged and enraged monsters have different patterns. You should try your best to learn both unenraged and enraged movesets. Why most people have no clue how to build for damage in Monster Hunter. His point here is that utility skills can sometimes outweigh damage skills. The example he gives is if a monster does something that tremors or wind pressures you in 1 out of 6 of its sequences, a point of tremor resistance or a point of windproof would be stronger than a point of crit boost, because losing 1 in 6 punishes costs 17% damage, whilst the point of crit boost is just 5% damage. Then he runs through a list of monsters that roar, tremor, wind pressure, or blight you often. The numbers he uses here are arbitrary, but the point is valid. Even speedrunners take tremor res against Furious Rajang or use earplugs against Nogagante. I would personally not drop crit boost for it though, since there are less valuable skill points to spend, but it does improve your practical DPS. He says a couple things near the end that I disagree with though. He mentions taking elemental resistance skills against monsters because he thinks it'll make you heal less often because you take less damage, but if you get hit, you're still taking damage and you'll still be healing anyway, right? Like, it's not going to save you any time there. Elemental resistance and defense boost also don't scale very well in Monster Hunter, and they only reduce damage by a small percentage at endgame. He thinks fire resistance will reduce the heat damage from Teostra. It won't, you need heat guard. But blast resistance against Brachy and effluvia resistance against Valhazark, those are basically mandatory. He also claims in this video that breaking the wings of monsters that fly will stop them from flying. I wish this was how it worked, but it's not. They can still fly. He also says that Part Breaker can give you crazy CC sequences, but I would disagree here because you really need to actually calculate thresholds and build specific sets and use specific combos to chain CC properly. Just dumping some Part Breaker in your set might actually mess up your thresholds. The final thing he says is that if you feel like you're not hitting the monster enough, that it's a clear sign that you need to look at your armor skills and get skills that improve uptime. The first thing that I would recommend instead is that you look at the monster and try to understand its moveset. Roars, tremors, and wind pressure only happen on a small number of attacks, and the main cause of low uptime is just poor monster knowledge. Otherwise though, this video makes a good point. Why greeting that last hit is costing you more than you think in Monster Hunter. I don't understand the point of this video or understand why it's 4 whole minutes, because he spends 30 seconds making a very simple point I'm pretty sure even beginners should be able to figure out. If you keep attacking at the wrong time, you might get hit. If you stop attacking a bit earlier, you can avoid getting hit. The next 3 minutes are just him covering the defensive options weapons may have. He doesn't provide any helpful advice regarding how to tell when it's time to stop attacking in this video, but he will build upon that later on in other videos. The best place to stand in Monster Hunter. This video should be very useful for players new to Monster Hunter. His 2 rules regarding where to stand are that you should have access to a good hit zone, and you should be safe from the monster moveset. This is solid basic advice. He covers some types of attacks monsters have, which is useful information for new players too. His general advice is to not be too far from the monster and to stand slightly left or right of where it's facing, so you're close enough to attack it, and have time to react when it attacks you. I don't like his advice specific to brute wyverns though, where he recommends standing right between the legs. Obviously, some weapons can't reach the head on larger sized monsters and will target the legs, but you should still maintain positioning somewhat more towards the front. You get more predictable patterns from the monster when you're not right up in his ball sack, and forearms on some brutes can be a good target as well. He also thinks you should stand further to the side against elder dragons because of the so-called frontal cleave attacks, and I disagree with this too. If the monster is going to swipe at you like Teostra, Alatrian, or Vitalis' quick forearm swipes, it'll turn towards you and swipe at you, and trying to stand more to the side barely gives you any extra time to react, whilst it makes it harder for you to attack the head. Against these swipes, you can iframe, guard, or walk backwards. Walking sideways does not escape. Overall though, this guide gives some good insight into the basics of Monster Hunter combat, and I like what he says at the end, that you should decide where to stand on a monster by monster basis. For more experienced players, I'll add that you should stand in a place where you'll be able to predict or bait the monster's behavior and punish it. As you improve the game, positioning becomes more of an offensive tool than a defensive one. This is the number one reason your hunts take so long. He starts this video by saying that more damage makes monsters flinch and topple more, and the more damage and CC you get, the more it snowballs. I completely agree with this part. He says that flinches and topples are the only crowd control in the game that comes from your weapon, but I guess he forgot about KO and status. Then he says he went through all the monster data and got a magic number, 1200, which is probably the average flinch threshold. He then makes up another number, 140, which is meant to represent like a progression set doing a couple of hits or whatever, and on that basis he tells players to expect to flinch every 8 or 9 quick punishes under these conditions. These numbers are very arbitrary, but like the concept is sound. You just need to know the threshold and count your combos and how much damage they do to understand when to expect a flinch or a topple. And this is an important skill for improving a Monster Hunter. It can get very complex though, as you need good estimates for thresholds and the damage of each combo, because thresholds can also be exceeded, locked, or overlapped. So it takes a lot of experience and calculation to put the skill into practice. I don't like the emphasis he placed on the 1200 number though, because some players might go off and expect a flinch from this much damage. With endgame monsters, the flinch thresholds on parts are closer to 4,000 to 5,000 in solo, and even higher in multiplayer. And whilst the flinch management advice he's giving is useful, I do not think that it's the number one reason why hunts take so long. Flinch management is getting towards the advanced end of Monster Hunter combat. If someone's hunt's taking a long time, the number one reason is because they lack monster knowledge. They don't understand the monster's movesets and patterns, which makes it very hard to hit the monster and not get hit back. Why you suck at your weapon in Monster Hunter? Michael says that Monster Hunter is about identifying when to attack and picking the right option for the window. I agree with this. He mentions his magic numbers of 1.5 seconds, 3 seconds, and 5 seconds. These numbers are meant to be based off the recovery time of monster attacks and sequences, and he tells players to figure out the best damage or utility combos for these windows. Like, the general concept makes sense, but those numbers he uses are silly. Throughout all his videos, Michael's going to gradually expand on his philosophy, but the way he thinks about Monster Hunter is like in fighting game terms, when he looks at the end lag of monster attacks and simply tries to apply the appropriate punishes for these end lags, like a fighting game punish. If you truly understand Monster Hunter combat, you should be able to prepare or execute punishes during or even before attacks start, depending on monster sequences, if you have sufficient monster knowledge. So his approach falls short when he actually tries to expand beyond the basics of Monster Hunter and explain more advanced principles. His own gameplay is mediocre because of his lack of a deeper understanding. I'll discuss a lot of this later when he starts trying to make more advanced guides, but for now I'll just move on. Why your damage output sucks in Monster Hunter? His point here is that the main reason people can't hit the monster is because they can't identify the monster's moves fast enough, or they don't know what attack is coming. And I completely agree. His example with Velkhana's tail sweep illustrates the point well. If you identify this move and understand its hitbox, you get a lot of extra time to do your punish. He gives advice on how to learn to identify moves, first saying you should hunt completely solo, no palico, to learn to identify moves from the front. But then he says it's also good to learn when your palico and other hunters present, so you can identify moves from other angles. These tips are a little contradictory and they sound sort of useless to me because he's just telling people to play the game, which they are doing already. However, though, I thought about it a bit more, right? And if the player enters the hunt with a mindset of trying to learn and identify monster attacks, then they'll be actively thinking and not just playing on autopilot, so his advice probably works. He also recommends just going into a hunt and holding block with your lance so you can understand hitbox timings. I don't really recommend this one because the monster is going to behave quite differently if you just stand there and guard, compared to when you're fighting it with other weapons. So I think it's better to just try and experiment with your own weapons options. Key point of the video is still solid though. Why you shouldn't just tackle everything as a greatsword player is probably the first video where Michael started saying stuff that I thought was just outright stupid. He constructs a hypothetical scenario where the monster is constantly doing some quick attacks, and the hunter is responding with draw slashes. The hypothetical tackle spammer tackles through the first attack and either whiffs or lands his strong charge after his tackle, then either gets hit or the monster whiffs him. His diagram is meant to support his point that tackling is bad in this scenario. Obviously, tackle everything is stupid advice, but the hypothetical Michael makes is stupid too. If you do a tackle through this attack here, surely the diagram would look more like this. For whatever reason, Michael's assuming that the strong charge slash would get you punished, whilst the draw slash would not, even though when I imagine this scenario, those attacks would both be coming out during the same punish window. I would even argue that for many punishers, tackling through an attack into a max level strong charge is faster than avoiding an attack than doing a max level draw slash. I think the hypothetical should just be discarded. My advice regarding tackling is that no, of course, you don't tackle everything, but the tackle is a strong option because it lets you skip to the next charge attack in your combo, and it should be reserved for instances where you know you can safely armor an attack and prepare a stronger punish. Here is an example on Velkhana's Ice Rings. If you just avoid them and draw slash, you get a weaker punish than if you tackle through in strong charge. The move is super telegraphed, so you should have time to prepare the tackle. This is how I would argue for the why you shouldn't tackle everything statement. I wouldn't just say tackling is bad and make a stupid hypothetical for it. I would demonstrate that you should only tackle when you know you'll get a guaranteed follow-up. And I would show an example of how random hopium tackles get punished. Do this one simple trick to instantly be better than 95% of hunters in MH. Michael's one simple trick here is to only attack when you are certain your attack is safe. As soon as you think there's any risk of being attacked or if you might miss, you should just stop and wait for the monster's next move. He says this will help a player watch the monster more and understand its moveset, and that it will make the player's movement and positioning more efficient. I think this tip is useful for players who overextend or mindlessly mash buttons, but I've seen the opposite type of player who is just constantly afraid to hit the monster, so this probably won't help them. The list of options he spouts at the end is kind of silly. He says you can do stuff like sheath, sharpen, use items, pick up slinger ammo, etc. after you stop attacking, but he said you should stop attacking when you don't think it's safe to attack. Why would it be safe to sharpen then? Why you suck at punishing a toppled monster. The Kushala example in this video is pretty good. He says if you stand the spot above or below the head where Kushala is toppled, his head bob animation will push you out of position and you may miss your combo. However, this is all he says. The pinned comment under this video does his job for him. The Argent Dragon actually explains a lot more about punishing toppled monsters, telling players to consider the topple type and subsequently the topple duration, and he gives some tips for dealing with mount topples too. The Universal Theory of Defense in Monster Hunter Part 1 and 2. So in Part 1 he has this blocking and dodging axis, which is meant to illustrate how each weapon would utilize defensive options. He starts by chucking sword and shield right in the middle, and talking about how good guard SNS is in certain matchups. He's talking about Iceborne, not Sunbreak, so anyone who plays the weapon at a decent level should be confused at this point. Even with maxed out guard, SNS takes a lot of knockback from most endgame monster attacks. SNS has an option, backhop, that gives you more iframes than a dodge roll. This backhop leads directly into what might be the strongest combo in this game, the Perfect Rush. If you watch any high-level SNS gameplay, you'll see a lot of backhops in the Perfect Rush. Blocking with SNS gives no real follow-up, it should really only be a final resort. So then he chucks Lance on the far right, which is fair enough, no complaints here. but he puts gun lance right besides it. I would disagree with how far right he has placed gun lance. Whilst gun lance does have comparable guard strength to lance, the key difference between the two weapons is the strength of follow-ups you get after guarding. Lance is built to counter thrust. Gun lance just gets block stun. Again, if you watch high-level gun lance gameplay or ask any good gun lance player, they prefer the iframe because it lets them access their offensive options more quickly for more effective punishes. His reason for putting gun lance just slightly to the left of lance is pretty stupid too. He says that gun lance's attacks have more active frames whilst lance will be hiding behind its shield more. I'm surprised no lance mains got upset at him in the comment section. Lance wants to guard for its offense and should be constantly poking between the guards. So something very silly about this chart is that for all the non-shield weapons apart from greatsword, you can't guard. That makes me wonder why any of the weapons that can only rely on dodging wouldn't just be on the far left. He puts dual blades on the far left, hammer and horn a bit less left, and switch axe and glaive even less left. I don't get why. These are all purely dodging weapons. He says guarding is a last resort on greatsword, and I agree with that. And he also says a charge blade can move back and forth along this axis, and I agree with that too, but whatever. This whole chart is pointless and wrong. He only starts making an actual useful point 3 minutes and 30 seconds into the video when he's finished with the dumb chart. He says whatever defensive option your weapon utilizes, the goal is to use these options to avoid getting hit, whilst also maintaining a position in which you can punish the monster by attacking a weak spot. He says the process for dodging is to bait an attack, dodge it, then get in position, whilst blocking is pre-positioning, then baiting an attack, then blocking it. This part makes sense and it's a really good way to break it down. But again, the chart sucks and doesn't really demonstrate any point at all. If he wanted to illustrate how each weapon actually utilizes its defensive options, he should have addressed them each in more detail and provided examples. But instead he makes some very general sweeping statements, several of which are incorrect. On to part 2. Part 2 really annoyed me, and I even left a long comment under the video. He breaks down a list of defensive options that players have. Sidestepping is just walking away from a move. He lists 3 frame counts that represent different unsheathed walking speeds and how long they take to travel the distance of a Rathian head apparently. Sheath and sprinting should be self-explanatory from the image, and dodge's 54 frames are just the roll animation. He hasn't included a hop here for whatever reason. Now, where this video starts to annoy me is with dodge iframe. He added the 54 frames from rolling to the 27 frames from sidestepping because, in his head, he thinks that when you iframe an attack, you have to spend time repositioning to get the subsequent punish. Any well-positioned and executed iframe should not require you to spend an extra 27 frames of walking to where you can get the punish from. Of course, this might depend on player skill level, but him showing dodge iframe as an 81 frame option basically communicates to the uninformed viewer that iframing is not good, which will discourage them from properly exploring that option. Any advanced player knows that this is definitely not the case. Players should practice getting iframe timings down because they allow you to maintain position, not break it, and because they generate frame advantage, not disadvantage. I also believe that the 27 frames he has for sidestepping underrepresents how long a sidestep actually takes. This is because after you finish any attack on your weapon, you have to wait for the attack's full end lag before you start walking again. With your hops or rolls, however, you can cancel this end lag very early. The point he makes at the end is an interesting one. He says that you tell someone is good at Monster Hunter if they take less frames to play defense, which I agree with. And he says that you should try and utilize the most frame efficient option possible, which I agree with too. Here you can read my angry comment and his response. I say that iframes are cool because well-timed and positioned iframes have your 54 roll animation frames overlap with the monster's attacking frames, meaning that your end lag frames will be very few, whilst guarding's 20 end lag frames always happen after the monster attacks. He responds by saying you have to spend frames pre-positioning for the iframe. When I mentioned pre-positioning in my comment, I didn't mean that you stop attacking and move to a good spot. I meant that while you're attacking, you should already be in a good position. It costs 0 extra frames. I think here he's also saying that depending on what the monster parts end up, you might have to reposition afterwards anyway. Well, no you won't. If you iframed in the right direction, especially if your weapon has hops, you can maintain a good position. He then says stuff is on a case-by-case basis when I mentioned that Gunlance prefers to iframe than block. Well, earlier Michael himself mentioned that good players will spend minimal frames of defense, right? And when you watch any good Gunlance player, they very rarely block, they iframe instead. The best players for most weapons in Iceborne utilize iframes extensively. It's a very frame-efficient defense, you can cancel the end lag of your attacks with it, and you have little end lag after iframing properly. Obviously though, perfectly positioning yourself outside of a hitbox and continuing to attack is superior, but that's not always an option. The number one difference between vets and noobs when avoiding monster attacks. The point he tries to make in this video is that so-called veterans would want to walk rather than roll to follow a monster or avoid its attacks. It's the same principle as in his universal theory of defense. Basically, he really likes the idea of sidestepping attacks rather than dodging them, but as I explained earlier, for a lot of attacks, especially in endgame, iframes will give you more frame advantage. Also, for a lot of distance creating attacks monsters have in endgame, such as AT Velk's dash into Sweeping Ice Beam, or Elatrian's equivalent dash into Fire Beam, you would much rather roll than walk because it does close distance faster. If your weapon has a fast sheath though, you can sheath and run instead. The top 4 reasons why you keep getting hit by the monster. I don't have much to say about this video. You get hit because you overcommit, because you get stuck against the wall, you get boxed in by the monster itself, or because you're not investing in enough evasion or guard levels. What he says here, it all makes sense. Why you struggle to get your attack in on the monster. He shows some examples of poor positioning and demonstrates how that'll make you too slow to get a punish off, or late. He then describes the scenario where you're on time, which is when you're in a good position and you have avoided the monster's attack. He says that when you're on time, you should select an appropriate punish for the window the monster gives you, which is good enough basic advice. The 1.5 second, 3 second, and 5 second figures he gives are kinda weird though. I don't know any high-level Monster Hunter players who think about punish windows in this way. People just experiment to find the combo they can pull off on specific punishes. And I can think of many moves that don't fit into these time periods, but whatever. Last of all, he describes a scenario he refers to as being early, when the monster is attacking but will miss you, so you get a so-called true counter in his words. He loves to use this term for any scenario where you can attack the monster while the monster is attacking. He thinks that this sort of scenario is very rare in single player though, but I would disagree. Even in endgame, you get huge free openings like when Elatrian does Lightning Rain, Lightning Rose, the Ice Field, the Downward Ice Breath, the Sweeping Flame, or like Vitalis' Cone, Charged Fireballs, or his 360. I would say that learning these mid-attack punishes is key for developing your gameplay. If you're just taking turns with the monster to attack, that's some beginner level stuff. How to be better than 95% of hunters at a new weapon in only 10 minutes. This video is 15 minutes long. You see him pressing buttons for 10 minutes while making the point to look at your in-game moveset guide, and he then recommends you go watch a YouTube guide anyway after playing around with your weapon for long enough. He says this will make you retain information from the guide better because you're already familiar with the moveset, but I don't really think that'll make you learn much faster, and I think this video is a big lie since you'll have spent 15 minutes watching this video, 15 minutes fucking around in training area, and another 15 minutes watching some other YouTube guide. So that's a lot more than the promised 10 minutes. How to see a monster 10 times faster than 95% of hunters in Monster Hunter. Okay, I play on keyboard and mouse, so hearing him tell people to max their controller sensitivity to see monsters faster was absolutely hilarious to me. Like, I have no clue how useful this video actually is, and I was not expecting a camera settings guide from that title, but well, you guys let me know if that's useful or not. How to topple every monster in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Okay, this video, it has a lot of monsters, and I don't know as much about Iceborne as I do about Sunbreak, particularly all the shit mons, but like, even I was immediately able to spot a bunch of oversights he made. I'm just gonna list the ones I noticed, and I know that there are many more he missed. The key takeaway here is that his guide is not comprehensive, his research wasn't deep enough, and his game knowledge is lacking. Like, this guide is undercooked. He made so many mistakes. So, Ebony Odogoron. It does not take 2 leg flinches to topple him, but just 1 at the start. And then he has Aura Topple Threshold on his head too. All the Wraths, they will air dunk from both head flinch and wing flinch. You need 3 wing flinches or 1 head flinch to air dunk them. He says all the Wraths have a head topple and rise, but he's wrong. They don't have a head topple, they need to be flying for air dunk, but like on the ground, head topple doesn't exist. The Legianas and the young Garugas can air dunk from both the head and tail. Anjanath needs 3 leg flinches, not 2. Nagakuga also has a head topple in addition to the arm topple. Same with Barioth. Michael's clueless about the Devil Joes. So how to topple a Devil Joe is that when they're doing the shovel mouth attack, you can do any amount of damage anywhere and they'll go into a very long stagger that lasts just as long as the topple, if not longer than the average topple. And if they're on low HP, like below 40% or 30%, I think it's 30%, they will topple instead of staggering. Lunastra head break leads to a topple, and the topple thresholds for both the forelegs and hind legs are shared. The Ostra's head break also leads to a topple and it's separate from the flinch topple, and like Lunastra and Teostra, right, their head breaks are HP locked. For Iceborne, it's locked to 20% HP, and in Sunbreak, Teostra's head break is locked to 30% HP. Rajang and Furious Rajang, in addition to the arm topple, they also have a head topple. Michael makes up some random shit about Zenoga, but the pinned comment explains it properly. And Raging Bracky has a topple and head break and forearm break too, not just a leg topple. Why you suck at Clutch Claw and how to not. This is another video he made where the pinned comment answers the question better than Michael's video. Just read the pinned comment, it summarizes my exact thoughts on the video. Why Monster Hunter is so hard to master. Michael states that the developers of Monster Hunter aren't concerned with making a fair fight, but they just want to make a good combat simulator. This is a really weird opinion. From my perspective, I can see that there are a bunch of monsters in the game with mechanics or movesets that can be difficult for less experienced players to deal with, but pretty much every single monster presents some obvious openings or patterns for players to punish. The developers clearly designed these patterns so that players could have a turn to hit the monster, and I think that's pretty fair of them. Some of the things he brings up are valid. He states that a large part of understanding Monster Hunter is figuring out what to do in these time frames the monster presents, and he says that someone who focuses on learning the monster will probably do better than someone who just spent time learning the weapon. But in his example with Glavenus, he claims that when Glavenus is enraged, a lot of his punish windows are under 1.5 seconds, even if the player is perfectly positioned. The glaring oversight he makes here is that he fails to understand Glavenus and its patterns. Its recovery times on its attacks may seem short if you only consider end lag. However, Glavenus has some very telegraphed attacks and sequences, and there are many opportunities to prepare big punishes whilst Glavenus is mid-sequence, due to how its hitbox's positioning works. Some weapons with very slow, high-commitment attacks might not be 100% safe after executing these punishes, but with proper flinch management that's not an issue, and generally, your very slow, high-commitment attacks are very good at getting flinches. Here are some examples of how you can punish Glavenus if you understand its moveset patterns properly. His key takeaway at the end of the video is correct. By focusing more on what the monster is doing, you will improve. I agree. I just find it a bit ironic though, since he compiled a whole spreadsheet of Glavenus recovery times, but didn't notice its easy telegraphs and all the free punishes it gives. The first ever useful and practical YouTube guide that stops making Chargeblade feel like doo-doo. How to stop Chargeblade from feeling like doo-doo part 2. Why people don't understand the power of CB guard point, and I break down bad CB gameplay. His advice in this Charge Blade series of videos is just questionable and his tutorial's incomplete. In the first video, he talks about charging your shield, guard points, and how to spend files. This guide is really weird to me. For whatever reason, he says that the axe morph is slow and tells people to use the load files into ED1 sequence so you can spend files faster. First of all, these two move sequences are the same speed. Second of all, you don't want to always be spending your files. The axe morph overhead slash is better damage, particularly in Savage Axe mode, and not spending your files is important because it lets you maintain Savage Axe mode for longer. But for whatever reason, Michael does not mention the existence of Savage Axe even once in his first video. In the second video, he spends the first 2 minutes talking about an infinite combo in sword mode that I guarantee you will never see any good Charge Blade player using. Then he claims during the guard point section that you can't hold guard after the round slash guard point and rise. He's wrong, you can. And the rest of the video is spent on sword mode attacks. This is the last guide he made in his Charge Blade is Doo-Doo series, and he never makes it to explaining Axe mode, Savage Axe, when to use AED, and when to use SAED. So it's just incomplete. Why people don't understand the power of CB guard point is such a weird video to me. Even in the YouTube comments, people are questioning the video's point. He talks about how the spinning slash is so great because its guard point saves you frames apparently. His idea is since a guard point exists, you can overextend in short windows, and if your guard point procs, it cancels out some end lag, so therefore it's a massive boost of DPS to use this attack. Here are some of the commenters asking him what the fuck he's on about, and yeah, the theoretical spinning slash guard point DPS games really don't matter. Watching his bad CB gameplay video, the title is accurate, and honestly, I couldn't make it through this video. The gameplay is bad, and Michael says some stuff that's wrong. So, why does Michael not cover Axe mode, Savage Axe, when to use AED, or when to use SAED in his guides? Well, I think Michael just has an aversion to any move with significant animation time or commitment, and that he's just not good enough at Charge Blade to actually explain how to play it properly. He's not actually very good at Monster Hunter in general and doesn't actually have monster knowledge, so he doesn't know how to utilize these higher animation commitment options. If you don't believe me, the next section on his greatsword guides and the section on his SNS vs Volcana gameplay video should demonstrate the fact that he's kind of bad at the game. How to make GS not feel like doo-doo, why your GS damage sucks and how to not, and I break down bad greatsword gameplay. Michael has spent a lot of his time talking about improving gameplay, about optimal punishes, stuff like that, but the way he plays greatsword is so suboptimal, and I can't find a better term to describe it other than cowardly, because he is so scared of true charge slash. This is symptomatic of his lack of monster knowledge and the fact that he isn't actually very good at Monster Hunter. I'll discuss this in more detail later, but basically, from his first video, his greatsword philosophy revolves around using strong charge slash. Generally, people recommend draw slash for people new to greatsword, and people who are good use slinger TCS, but he spends the entirety of his first video covering how to get into strong charge slash, then telling players to roll cancel the end lag and sheath, and the roll cancel and sheath is legit, but playing around strong charge slash in a 5th gen Monster Hunter is questionable. He expands upon this philosophy in Why Your GS Damage Sucks video, where he compares a bunch of combos. He states that your biggest gains from greatsword aren't from charging your attacks, but from landing more hits. If you look at the combo list, there's no TCS at all in here, and in the comments section he even mentions that he doesn't give TCS the light of day. He shows off his gameplay style in the I break down bad greatsword gameplay video, and yeah, I agree, it's some bad greatsword gameplay. He takes over 6 minutes to kill an Odogaron with Vitalis greatsword, whilst providing commentary on what he could have done better. To a high-level Monster Hunter player, particularly someone who mains greatsword, all the commentary he provides would be laughable. New players wouldn't know any better, but people who understand this game well should immediately notice that Michael doesn't really know how to play. My thoughts on his entire greatsword philosophy are that it's just a reflection of his lack of understanding of Monster Hunter combat and his generally poor monster knowledge. It's so ironic that for someone who's spent time recording monster moveset properties in a spreadsheet, he looks completely clueless when fighting this monster. He spends the whole hunt running around and spamming uncharged draw slashes whenever he thinks Odogaron will be standing still, but he doesn't actually punish any of its moves properly. Since he doesn't know how to properly position himself and move in response to Odogaron's sequences, it makes perfect sense that he doesn't ever mention using Slinger Burst into True Charge Slash. Greatsword's actual game plan in Iceborne is to land as many of these as possible. Of course, there are lots of short punish windows where a fully charged draw slash or a strong charge slash are your best options, but when you actually understand how a monster moves, you can land true charge slashes even when they're not toppled. Uncharged slashes are also an interesting case of opportunity cost, a concept that Michael's discussed before, where if you spam uncharged slashes, then you got a roll and sheath, you're spending frames which could have been utilized in response to a move that might give a bigger punish. Here is an example of a player who knows Odogaron's moveset well, and properly utilizes positioning and timing to land big punishes. Monster knowledge, positioning, and timing are key to Greatsword, and if you learn these, you won't be stuck spamming uncharged slashes. Okay, so this is the first video I ever saw from Michael, and it was the main reason that for the longest time I thought he was a complete moron. How 6,000 plus hour players perceive Monster Hunter gameplay. He just shows a Volcana hunt with SNS. The video is almost 4 minutes long, but he doesn't even kill in this time span. Anytime Velk attacks, moves, or topples, he overlays a colored bar that represents its active frames, recovery time, or his intended movement path or whatever. I don't know what the fuck he was cooking with this one, because this video just shows that he sucks at the game. I don't even have 6,000 hours in Sunbreak, I have barely 900 in Iceborne, but this level of SNS gameplay looks more like someone with 60 hours. I don't even have 6 hours on SNS in Iceborne, but I could immediately see a bunch of stuff he does wrong, and I'm sure there's more that I missed. The opening quote is super cringe. He starts with a wallbang and then claws on the tenderize. SNS can use claw uppercut, but whatever, he brought the shaver jewel so he could get some ammo. And after the tenderize, he does a poorly timed and positioned perfect rush and then gets roared. The second wallbang sends him behind Velk. So any good SNS player in this position knows they can do the charge back up into the falling bash to do damage and reposition to Velkana's head, after which they can get a full perfect rush combo in. Michael just runs all the way to the head, does PR1 into PR2, then restarts the loop in a bad position and hits Velk in the legs a bunch before missing the PR finisher. Okay, so here he sees Velk start the ice rings. He puts a big red bar on the screen to signify that the attack has a lot of scary active hitbox frames. So he waits out the first ice ring, then walks back in a weird line to the head to get a couple of hits in. This punish is so suboptimal and is a perfect example of when iframes are superior. You can just back up through the ring and hit a PR1 to PR2 on the head, which gives way more uptime and way more damage. Same with the next move, Michael tries to avoid it by repositioning but gets hit. If he just back hopped here, he would get another PR1 into PR2. When he gets his head break topple, he rolls forward after his first PR loop, which messes up his positioning and causes a hit to land on the neck instead of the head. I'm surprised he hit so many hits in the head and even the finisher in the head, because any good SNS player knows that you should side roll when restarting PR loops, or your positioning gets fucked. He gets the head flinch topple right after this, but he walks to the head instead of doing the falling bash punish, and subsequently he misses everything else. On the ice puddle, the punish is to sling a burst PR, but he doesn't know that. Again in this vid, he forward rolls after a perfect rush on the topple and he misses the subsequent perfect rush. Here you see his response to a clagger, which is the funny drooling animation a monster does, right? He tries some weird optimization where he gets a free hit before clawing back on, because clawing back on refreshes the clagger for 4 seconds, but then he misses his PR punish because he's on the wrong side of the head. There's a lot more stuff he messes up, but this should give a clear enough picture. Michael's not that good at the game, and whilst he preaches a lot about learning monster behaviors and optimizing your responses, he hasn't done it himself. Your punish window sucks and how to fix it. I can't help but laugh when I see that he uses the Volcana hunt to demonstrate how to punish the monster properly, like nothing he did was optimal there, but he introduces the concept of positioning time tax and move ID tax. Essentially, he's just saying that the time you spend repositioning and your reaction time both eat into your punish windows. That's true, but like at a high enough level, you sort of anticipate certain things happening and like this shouldn't be an issue, but in his self-analysis, he seems just completely unaware of just how shit his own punishes are. His basic message here is right, learn the monster better and position better, but he doesn't do it himself. If you actually want to elevate your punish game and learn some advanced stuff beyond just positioning better and reacting faster, I made an advanced combat guide for Sunbreak that contains a lot of advice that is applicable to Monster Hunter in general. The 5 neutral states in Monster Hunter. Okay, so he's yapping about neutral here, but initially he doesn't explain what neutral is. He just goes straight into listing different states the player can be in during neutral, but neutral is when the monster has finished the sequence and is about to go into the next one, so you don't know for certain what the monster will do next and have to prepare to react. The first state he lists of not neutral just means you've overcommitted and you might get hit by the next monster sequence. Recovery neutral means that you're in a bit of end lag and you can cancel out the end lag by dodging, and this is a pretty common occurrence in the game. Active neutral means that you've already started gambling with your greatsword charge, longsword special sheath or whatever, and you're just praying the monster does what you want it to do next. Unsheath neutral is another common scenario. It's just when you're standing there with your weapon out, and sheath neutral should be obvious now. He just covers all the options a hunter has in neutral states, but he doesn't really give advice on what options you should use when. All he says is that you shouldn't be in not neutral, you shouldn't overcommit, which is like basic enough advice. I was able to figure out what he's talking about, right? But like, I'm almost certain that 99% of players would have no idea what his point is if they just watched this video without my explanation. The video would have been much more helpful if he actually explained what the heck neutral was before he started the yap, and also gave some advice as to what options a player should utilize whilst in neutral preparing for the next monster sequence. What to do when a monster creates distance between you and him in Monster Hunter. So the first recommendation Michael has is that when the monster runs away from you, you can just sheath or sharpen or drink a potion or do some other item related actions with the sling or whatever. Do something productive with the forced downtime, he says. He discourages chasing the monster and attacking because apparently the monster will have frame advantage since by the time you catch up to it, it may have queued its next move already. This is a really surface level analysis. There are so many different monster attacks and sequences where distance is created, and each follow-up each monster has after distance creating attacks is different. You have Rathian and Tigrex doing triple charges, you have Volcana and Elatrian running away and doing sweeping beams, you have Odogaron's whole dance sequence. Your optimal response to each of these things is completely different, and it also varies by which weapon you're using. The advice he gave to just manage items is silly, it's rarely the best choice, and this video would have been so much more useful if he covered specific responses to specific moves. The final piece to mastering an MH weapon. He talks about weapon walk speeds here. Basically, he just says that walking around with the soul weapons isn't great, and that you should try and understand your weapon's movement options. I don't think I'd say this is the final piece to mastering a weapon, and he doesn't say anything that demonstrates any mastery, but the underlying point of you should get used to your weapon's movement is like, it's fair enough. Why rolling is costing you damage in Monster Hunter. Michael says that one of the main reasons why people hunt slow is because they roll too much. He has a chart where the green parts represent the time you're hitting the monster with a combo, and the red parts are the time spent moving. You can see that the rolling and repositioning makes you spend more time between your attacks. He uses this to try and prove that rolling decreases DPS, but this is a stupid hypothetical and is incredibly reductive. Yes, you shouldn't spam roll when the hypothetical monster spams a hypothetical attack that you can just sidestep. He does acknowledge that many monsters have attacks you can't just walk around and that you'll have to iframe instead, and he'll cover that in his next video. He does not actually cover it in his next video. The 3 types of monster attack punishes in Monster Hunter. The 3 types of punishes here are derived from Michael looking at the recovery times and active hitboxes on a monster's moves. He has light punishes, where the monster gives a short window of opportunity and has long active hitboxes, heavy punishes, where the monster gives you a long window of opportunity, and so-called true counters, where you can attack the monster during its attack. He makes fun of the spreadsheet crowd because apparently they don't understand damage uptime, which is super ironic because he's working on a spreadsheet and he himself doesn't understand damage uptime. One of his true counter examples is Rathian Tailspin, when he says you can hit the legs and that they're objectively the best option. He claims you can't hit the tail because it's an active hitbox, it's pretty true, but he claims you can't hit the head because it's moving, which is false. This again demonstrates his lack of Monster Hunter skill. You can hit the head in 3 different ways. The easiest way is to just chase the head down with a gap closer during the spin. The better way is to just get dragged along with the head while the Rathian spins. And another way is to predict where the head will end up and aim a big attack there. Punishes in Monster Hunter have a lot more depth than Michael thinks. As mentioned before, with proper knowledge of monster sequences and behaviors, you can preemptively prepare higher commitment options. You can bait certain favorable monster attacks. You can even go for usually unsafe options with proper understanding of thresholds. Again, I'm going to recommend my own advanced combat guide if you really want to develop your punish game. While you still don't understand hit zone values after 1000 plus hours in Monster Hunter. Throughout this entire video, he continually says motion values instead of hit zone values, which is really annoying. What he tries to claim here is that because of uptime, you would rather be hitting an accessible shit zone multiple times rather than repositioning to get a hit on a distant weak spot. The title doesn't really line up with the key point, but whatever. He makes an example of the monster running past the player, and he says the caveman hunters will chase the head and hit the head. He says that's wrong, and players should study the hit zones and maximize damage and uptime. In his example, he said the players should hit the legs instead, because they're closer and you can hit them more times. He then does some napkin maths to show off why he's right, because apparently you'll deal more damage on the back legs instead because you get more hits in. Here is a comment I left saying why I thought he's wrong. I say that pretty much every monster will turn back around towards you, and that gives you a predictable opportunity to prepare a big attack for its head. For example, I use old gen head snipes with greatsword, but this stuff even works in 5th and 6th gen with light weapons. Also accounting for the existence of weakness exploit and crit boost, aiming for hit zones over 45 is going to secure a lot more damage because of crits compared to aiming for shit zones. Speedrunners understand the concept of uptime and have comprehensive monster knowledge. You rarely see speedrunners attacking the monster's ass as it turns around. They'll reposition or prepare an attack with a head turn. So yeah, this video is misleading with both the title and its advice. A first look at how monster AI is manipulated via hunter positioning. I was actually hopeful when I first saw the title of this video because it covers an important subject that I keep bringing up, understanding monster behavior and baiting it. Unfortunately, he only covers one shitmon, Baroth, and he just ran around shooting his slinger while counting which attacks Baroth did while he was either close or far away. It doesn't really cover specific positioning, sequences, baits, or any other monsters. The information he provides is hardly useful and the observations he makes are so basic. Baroth charges if you're far from him, sometimes he reapplies mud to himself. Those are the key points. He says that next time he'll delve into stronger monsters, but he never continues this series of videos, and I highly doubt that he'd be able to understand Elatrian and AT-Velk AI sequences anyway. What makes a good Monster Hunter player? All I can say about this video is that it's gibberish. He just yaps about things he doesn't understand, like speedrunning, challenge runs. I don't even know what the point of this video is. I don't know how it relates to being a good Monster Hunter player because You don't need to do any runs to be good. Overall, this title is just really weird and the video is really weird too. Why do you need to have perfect button inputs? He says that players shouldn't mash buttons because if you mistime a button press because of it, and your combo comes out too slow, your punish becomes unsafe. He's wrong though because you can just mash buttons since the buffering system exists and it lets your inputs come out frame perfect anyway. Like, I mash so many of my inputs when playing. How to play Charge Blade in less than 10 minutes in Monster Hunter Wilds. He made a few of these videos, but I don't understand enough about the other weapons in Wilds yet to confidently give my own opinion. This Charge Blade one covers the basic moveset and options, but he already has some weird opinions for me. He says that the new shield charging option is worse than the round slash shield charge, since the round slash does damage. This is such a stupid thing to say. You're just trying to charge a shield here, like the damage is inconsequential, the new method is faster so it's better in a lot of scenarios. Just like in his Iceborne guide, he spends most of his time on like weird sword attack sequences that no good charge player will actually use. In this guide though, he actually does cover Axe mode and Savage Axe and the AED SAED stuff, which is a first. Near the end, he says that because building files is so easy in Wilds, you'll want to do as many SAEDs as possible. When he released this video during the open beta period, this was a really stupid thing to say. We only had impact files in the beta, and the files were so weak. Like, SAED really sucked in the beta. I don't know why he recommends it so highly. Why MH is not a turn-based game. This title is pretty ironic. So much of the stuff Michael has said in his gameplay guides has been about punishing the monster in a 1.5, 3 or 5 second window after the monster executes an attack. Like, he's essentially already playing as a turn-based game. He draws up a matrix of options a player has in response to monster attacks with high or low startup and high or low recovery. This video is 11 minutes of bullshit really. Like, there are so many properties other than startup and recovery you need to consider with regards to moves a monster does, like where its hitboxes and hit zones are oriented, the monster's general movement during the attack, whether the attack is part of a sequence, how many active frames he's actually attacking for, not just the startup and recovery. But if I just analyze on the factors he's provided, he's getting stuff wrong anyway. UC here stands for uptime counter. He uses this to refer to when you can hit the monster whilst in startup or his active frames. He claims you need a high startup to utilize one of these. This is wrong. One specific move he mentions is Arkveld's Headbutt, which he says has low startup and low recovery. And like he's so insistent that you cannot, absolutely cannot, he says, uptime counter it. If you've ever fought Arkveld, you can keep attacking while it headbutts. Like, it doesn't flinch you, and just like the slightest lateral movement in the combo you're doing lets you completely avoid the hitbox and take no damage. So I would argue that it's a very easy uptime counter. He thinks the best option for dealing with low startup and low recovery moves is a perfect guard, and that repositioning or iframing is less viable because you won't have enough time to do it or to punish after doing it. Like, this is wrong, especially on weapons that can side hop. You can just hop to the side and do a quick poke. The vast majority of low startup, low recovery moves also have low active frames and small hitboxes. Just a slight amount of movement is required to avoid them, and you will have time for a quick attack or two. Also, you gotta consider that like some weapons don't have a perfect guard too. By the end, he's highlighted that he believes that so-called uptime countering and perfect guarding are commonly your best options to respond to a monster, but from my perspective, it varies so much by weapon, and as I said, some weapons don't have a perfect guard. I'm also concerned with his concept of uptime countering. Like, he's the sort of player who would rather stay in place hitting a shit zone instead of repositioning to attack a weak spot because of his limited understanding of uptime. And for someone claiming it's not a turn-based game, his approach is entirely reactionary. He will only choose his option based on the monster's behavior, and that sounds pretty turn-based to me. To actually escape turn-based combat requires a player to actively create opportunities for themselves, whether by baiting monster behaviors or applying CC to the monster. This requires the player to have a comprehensive understanding of monster behaviors and thresholds, as well as their own weapons options, and these are areas I think Michael is lacking in. This basically covers all his general gameplay guides and advice. He's made a lot of other stuff about wilds, but it's just him counting frames on movesets. I'm gonna assume he isn't wrong with the numbers there. Essentially, I can appreciate the type of content Michael's trying to make. All his guides that introduced very specific concepts to Monster Hunter can be very helpful for new players, and it shows, right? His comment sections are full of appreciative people who aren't experienced with the series, but on anything involving more advanced gameplay, Michael's lack of actual expertise is very apparent. I've had several other speedrunners or even just casual players link me these guides and highlight stuff they disagree with. For people actually looking for information on more advanced methods to improve at Monster Hunter, I can recommend the channel Monster Hunter. He's trying to break down monster behavior, mechanics, and thresholds properly, and the vast majority of stuff he discusses is useful and correct. I have nothing personal against Michael though, and if he starts improving the quality of advice he provides, I will be the first one to recommend it. Also, I bet lots of people are going to disagree, but the monster strength system for investigations and wilds, right? A tempered 3-star Arcveld and a tempered 5-star Arcveld. Yes, the 5-star has more HP. Yes, the 5-star does more damage. But no, 5-star is not faster, it is not more aggressive, it does not have different sequences, and it doesn't have different frequencies on each attack. It behaves the same. Michael said that he had no proof that the 5-stars have different moveset frequency modifiers. I have no proof against this either. But I talked to a lot of speedrunners and players who just play a lot of Monster Hunter. Nobody I spoke to mentioned any discernible difference between 3 and 5-star movesets, and after I brought it up, nobody came back to me saying they noticed anything different. There's also no way Capcom actually put the effort into coding different AI for these investigation levels. All these commenters here believe otherwise, but I think they're wrong. They're just getting hit harder, so they spend more time healing and running, and as a result, the monster feels scarier and more aggressive. It's also possible that players are confusing movesets and behaviors between regular and tempered investigation monsters. Most players are aware that low-rank AI is different from high-rank AI, but tempered AI is different too, and tempered monsters enter the powered-up state faster. For example, tempered Arcveld's chains power up faster, and tempered New Udra starts on fire. But the AI between the same tempered or non-tempered monster with different investigation levels is the same. I know I'm just saying some completely anecdotal stuff. It's some he said, she said, logical fallacy bullshit here, but who would you trust more? The good players who play the game a lot, or the bad players who probably don't have much monster knowledge? And one more thing. Michael tries to test whether or not higher star investigation monsters do more damage in the worst way possible. He doesn't actually go get hit by a monster. He just goes into the training area and jacks up the training dummy damage, which I guess is also denoted in star levels. But this is not the proper way to test. These dummy star values will obviously increase the dummy's damage, right? Because it's for the function of the training area. But that has no relation to the actual damage monsters do. You have to actually go test getting hit by the actual monster to prove whether or not the star level will change the damage or not. Getting hit by the dummy does not prove anything. But whilst the test is irrelevant, he does say the correct thing. Higher star monsters do more damage.